Thank you very much for inviting me to give this presentation today. It's an honor to talk to people interested in the sciences and in neurology, neurobiology, and art. I've had two professional careers in my life simultaneously. One is neurology, neurobiology. The other one is art. And I've sort of been blending the two things for the past more than 3 decades and exploring thinking and consciousness in the world, besides in the world of medicine, besides the world of basic neurobiological research, in the world of art. And both of these areas of my exploration have been, very successful in terms of the neurobiology research that I've done and accomplishments. I have about 75 research publications that have been published that every week are still even now being cited in journals such as published by the British Medical Journal and by the Mayo Clinic Proceedings just even last week with citations of my work there, which is quite an honor, given that I published these things quite a few years ago, and received almost $3 million in research grants to support my own research. So that's been a considerable accomplishment. One of the things that I did clinically that has improved the medical welfare of children with severe cerebral palsy is a vest therapy, a kind of a system of cleaning out lungs in very disabled children to prevent pneumonias. And since I started doing that research and published it, it's a sort of standard of care across North America at all of the pediatric hospitals. So I'm very proud of that accomplishment, which then is a long-lasting legacy improving the health care of disabled children. In the world of art, I stopped counting as well, more than 50 individual art exhibits, more than 100 group presentations. I just came back last month from Lithuania, where I had 7 different art exhibits in 7 different cities. We set up a very large outdoor installation of boulders. I'm going back next month to continue work on that big project. I'm working on establishing in the capital city, Vilnius of Lithuania, my own Neuro Art Center, a place where these kind of explorations can be continued on a formal basis, incorporating students and a lot of different activities in the academic world across Europe, and to continue what I've been trying to do individually on a much grander scale. So thank you very much for this opportunity to present some of my thoughts about memory and how I've addressed the issue of memory in my own artwork. Now, the one thing that's fascinated me is the simple fact. In our central nervous systems, we have 100 billion neurons. Okay, in our heads, in our brains, our livers are bigger. Our livers have more cells, but our liver doesn't produce thought. It doesn't produce consciousness. How is it that this specific set of cells in our body interconnect and produce thinking, produce consciousness, produce awareness of ourselves, awareness of others, and when you're aware of others, you automatically have society. You have societies forming, you have cultures forming, you have education forming. How does that happen? How does that happen? And to me, it's just been an absolutely fascinating question. How can that take place even? And so I've been exploring it and investigating it both in the neurobiology, in the clinical world, and in the world of art. And so I'm just going to get into some of the areas that I've looked at in my own artwork for this presentation. Now, just as an aside, there's just a kind of interesting little tidbit here. We have 100 billion neurons, but that's about, roughly speaking, the same order of magnitude of stars in our Milky Way galaxy, about 100 billion stars. And with the Hubble Deep Space experiments, photographs that have been done looking deep space, there's about 100 billion galaxies in the observable universe. So to me, it's sort of a very interesting coincidence that the number of neurons in our brains corresponds with our galaxy size and with the universe size. there may be more to it than simply coincidence. No further comments about that. Now, just to give a little bit of a review of what we're talking about, this is just a schematic drawing of a neuron. As a cell, it has in a central structure similar to all the other cells. It has a nucleus of DNA that codes the basic building blocks of what's used in the cell. You have all of the protein manufacturing materials and metabolic materials in the cell, center of the cell, just like all other cells. And you have these dendrites, these protuberances sticking out, which take in information from other neurons. And the information gets processed electrically, and the summation of the cell, of the electrical status of the cell, is summarized here in the axon hillock. And then when the conditions are correct for the cell itself, it fires a signal. And that signal is an electrical signal that propagates down the axon and goes to the synaptic terminals. And in the terminals, there is communication. The synaptic endings communicate with other cells. And this is just a schematic picture of a synapse, what happens. You have these little vesicles with different chemicals in them. And these little vesicles, when the signal comes down, are released to, and the chemicals come out. Now, there's a very large number of different neurotransmitters. They have different properties. Some of them are excitatory. They excite the cells to stimulate electrical activity. Other ones are inhibitory. They inhibit the cells. And many different chemicals are involved in this thing. The cells produce their own specific neurotransmitters that have their own specific effects. The transmitters come out. There is then receptors that receive the signal, the chemical signal, and then on the cell that receives it, then these receptors then translate that effect into electrical potentials, which then go down the dendrite and then is summated in the next cell. So that you have information traveling from one cell to the next cell and then going onwards. Okay, and then eventually these neurotransmitters are taken back up inside into the a neuron where it came back, and so they get prepared to be released again. So that's the kind of basic picture of how this works. And an awful lot when we deal with memory, the current thinking is that pretty much everything in memory deals with this area of the synapse. In this specific area, things that would strengthen the synaptic connection or weaken it. Okay. Now, just some side comments. This is a picture of Santiago Ramon y Cajal. He was a pathologist, a neuropathologist in Spain. And in the late 1800s, he developed a staining technique, and he's the first person who actually showed what neurons look like. It was unknown before him. And he's the first person who developed it, and drew the drawings and published them. And actually, in 1912, he got the Nobel Prize for the work that he did. So that was a really well-deserved accomplishment. And this is one of his drawings, just to show you the complexity of the neurons. And this is the first person to have developed a technique of looking and drawing it. Compared to current standards, a very primitive technique. So that currently you see much more complexity in the dendritic patterns of this particular cell from the cerebellar cortex. And then in terms of the connections between the cells, again, this is Cajal's drawing, and you see this is just a portion of the number of fibers that he stained that are visible here. So that if you were able to fully stain this, it would be black with all of the fibers running through here in terms of the complexity. So you have this incredibly complex network here of cells, tremendous dendrites, which can be very elaborate. You have axon projections that go out, which can be extremely elaborate. And you can have one side of the head, and axons go over the other side and branch onto a larger number of different neurons. So these can be very elaborate systems of neural networks. But how do they produce thinking? How do they produce consciousness? That still is a fascinating problem that isn't fully understood at all. Now, I do, again, a little side digression. This is Sigmund Freud. He's well known for his work in psychology and psychiatry. But what's not known is some of the things that he's done in other areas, which are really notable. As a child neurologist, the work that I did, of note, he wrote the second in the world's history, the second monograph in child neurology called infantile cerebral palsy. He coined that term. And he where he published his observations that the majority of cerebral palsied individuals have their difficulty because of things that took place before birth. Until then, everybody, Osler wrote the first book in child neurology, thought that it was all purely a birth injury that caused the thing. He said, no, this is well before birth. It was about 100 years later that the neurology community finally agreed with Freud and his interpretation on the cause of cerebral palsy. Freud was correct, and Osler and the prevailing opinion at the time was not correct. But this is a drawing that Freud made in 1895. Now, I do want to point out the date here because it was 2 years later that a fellow named Sherrington wrote and described the synapse and how neurons connect to one another and described how synaptic networks work. So Sherrington gets the credit 2 years later for describing the synapse. Now, this is Freud, now 2 years earlier, in his own notes. He didn't publish this, but his own notes describing a neural network where you have a negative input coming in from the outside, coming in onto neuron A, which then sends the same negative signal down to neuron B. So you have a neural network. And what's neat, interesting here, is that this system here is a network of neurons, a cascade of neurons that can then counteract this negative effect. They can inhibit neuron A. So that here Freud describes a system of excitation, inhibition in networks. So he describes, this is really what the entire nervous system is structured on. Besides the synapse networks, excitation, inhibition, so that this is the core of it, as described by. I think he deserves the credit for what is a synapse and how do neural networks work. Anyway, it's a kind of a small detailed history of neurology and neurobiology. Now, this is a very beautiful drawing, a kind of overall view of the way I've always looked at memory functioning and how I've approached it in my own artwork. And this is a drawing by Bernard Wenzel, and it's such a nice, simple approach, and it kind of cuts through a lot of the verbiage. When you look at articles written about memory, you'll see many, many different words used to describe it, and it gets to be very confusing what they're talking about. But this is a very nice format for it. In the center of it, you have this kind of equivalence taking place from left to right. This is individual, that's us, and our own memory function. That's what we have ourselves experienced with and what we have. But we communicate with others. We share our memories. We share our culture so that it's intrinsic. And from the world around us, we then increase our memory. We increase our experiences. So it's a go back and forth kind of a thing of memory functioning from the individual to the collective. And when you get into the collective, you get into, systems of communication and all things related to culture and cultural phenomena and society and functioning of societies. And that shows up in my own artwork, and I've been sort of looking at that too. Now, on the individual end, you have what you call it explicit and implicit memories as a very basic breakdown in it. And just to do the simple part of it first is the implicit. That this is unconscious. You don't even realize these memory systems are working, but they are. For example, I'm sure everyone here was listening, is able to walk. Now, when you were born, you weren't able to walk. You learned it. It became a learning. It's sort of a motor function that you learned that now is part of your existence that you don't think about. You don't think left, right when you walk. A bicycle, if you learn how to ride a bicycle, now it's automatic. You get on it and you don't have to think about it. When you first did, well, it was very difficult to learn how to do it. And so that this is procedural memory. It's sort of unconscious. It's built in, and you learned it, and it's there. The same way the memories of perceptions that come in, you have them, and they're all and it's there in a holding pattern in an unconscious way. Priming is a really cool word to have included here. Now, this is a stunning phenomenon that takes place in my life all the time. I'm sure it does in yours. And the example would be somebody asks you the name of a person or the name of some kind of thing, and you absolutely can't remember. You try, you can't remember it. And then you say, okay, fine, forget it. Let's get on it. So the conversation goes on to something else. 10, 15 minutes later, bingo, this name of a person pops into your head out of nowhere. You weren't trying, you weren't looking for it, but it shows up. Now, how is that possible? It means the neural networks were working. They were working unconsciously, implicit, unconscious system, looking for that name. And it took them 10, 15 minutes, and they finally found it. And then, boom, pops it up into consciousness and lets you know. So that's what priming is about. A fascinating phenomenon. You have these incredible memory networks at work all the time, but you don't even recognize it at all taking place. Now, the thing that we usually think about when we talk about memory is in the term of explicit. This is in our own consciousness. It comes in two basic breakdown forms, semantic and episodic. Semantic meaning is the word meaning. What is it that's the memory about? What's the content of the meaning? What are the words, the ideas? And then the episodic part of it is, well, where did it happen? When did it happen? What were the surrounding events that happened? And when you put them together with your own life, you can call them autobiographical memories. So this is a very nice way to look at memory as a general phenomenon in our minds. And then it's a nice framework if you look at literature about memory to kind of keep this in mind that whenever people are talking about it, some aspect of what's on this graph. Now, there are one thing is breakdown. We start getting into aspects of my own artwork now deals in terms of looking at aspects of memory functioning. We do have short-term memories, long-term memories. Short-term are processed in the hippocampus. They're about a minute or so, and if there's something notable about them, they can be turned into long-term memories. If we try and we memorize it, it does it. Some things automatically become long-term because of their nature. Most short-term memories, they just come and go, and there's nothing much about them. They're just part of our daily lives. We don't remember every single thing we ever did. So that the vast majority of short-term memories vaporize. Now, in terms of the neural networks where this thing takes place, the short-term memories are basically primarily processed in the hippocampus. And that's the structure here in this schematic diagram. And then from the hippocampus then, the long-term memories are stored throughout the cortical networks. And different cortical areas have different functionings, so visual, auditory, other cognitive areas. And so that the long-term memory is distributed very widely. And the connections from the hippocampus are very wide. As you see, the hippocampus circulates around, and you do have connections taking place throughout the cortex, so that where the storage of the long-term memories takes place and the interactions of them. Now, one thing is of note here is that right next to the amygdala, right next to the hippocampus, you have the amygdala right next to it. The amygdala processes our emotions, and so it's not surprising that anything that happens in our lives that has a high emotional content then produces memories much more readily. So that if something stunning or shocking happens to you, that's going to stay for possibly the rest of your life. And because of the amygdala influence and being close anatomically, I think is the major reason why that actually takes place. Now, looking at the hippocampus, again, this is now getting back to Cahal and cross section. What is the general structure, neuronal structure of it looks like with some of the neurons drawn in it. And I use this Cahal's drawing as a basis for a very large wall installation that I did in Atlanta, Georgia, at the Georgia Institute of Technology, where I was invited to do this piece. This is using my thought fragments. These are pieces of artwork, paintings that I did that I then cut up, mounted them on little boards, and chopped the boards up into these pieces. These are all about your size of your palm. And this wall installation is 30 feet, is about 10 meters. 30 feet would be 10 meters, 10 meters across. And then there's this conduit coming perpendicular to this piece, and this is like where the short-term memories are processed. And then the conduit is sort of like where the communication from the short-term memory into the cortex for long-term memory storage takes place. So this sort of simulates the short-term memory processing area, and then where and how it gets then transmitted. Now this conduit itself it is twice the size. It's about 20 meters in length. And these thought fragments include neuronal patterns, include my own electroencephalograms, include my own brain scan images in it, and word fragments, as you see, portions of words, portions of ideas that are incorporated, and this is part of the memory storage process that takes place within the hippocampal structure. And on the wall itself, you do have some short-term memories floating around. You have a little person swinging on a swing incorporated. You have a couple. This is now actually this human size. If you stood up next to it, it's about as tall as you would be. Of a couple sort of engaged in dancing. It takes two to tango is the name of this particular little detail. So autobiographical memory is incorporated in the hippocampal formation. And I do just sort of in passing want to mention that in terms of clinical medicine, the hippocampus really and the short-term memory processing contained in it is really the brunt of where Alzheimer's disease starts, and then it progresses from there, and that's where the memory loss, profound memory loss takes place in that disease process. It's in the hippocampus. And this is now installing the piece with Faraz helping me to do it. Now, another question comes up is, where are our memories stored? Now, I mentioned to you already the idea that changes at the synaptic level, changes in the connectivity, the strength of the connection between the synapse, between one neuron and another neuron, is where memories are stored. And definitely, synapses are extremely important in memory functioning. There's no doubt about it. But my question is that sufficient? Is that sufficient? We have 100 billion neurons. We have trillions and trillions of synaptic interconnections. But is that sufficient for our memory storage? We have so much in the way, let's say, even of just visual memory in our heads. Does that make sense? Or do we have to look at some other levels? Now, besides now at the synaptic level itself, when you look down a little bit further down, protein synthesis is very important. And if you inhibit protein synthesis, you're going to inhibit memory formation. Well, that's not so particularly surprising because certain proteins are involved in the synaptic structure. But you're getting down to a molecular level in it. You go down further, you look at the DNA level, you look at the methylation. If you inhibit methylation, process DNA, you can also inhibit memory formation. But now you're getting more distant, a little more distant from the synapse itself. You're getting now into functioning taking place at the genetic level, you know. And my idea is that, maybe you need to go even further down. Maybe memories, a lot of memories are stored even at more fundamental levels, which, let's say at the level of the quantum mechanics level. The, just one thing that's been recently discovered is that the sense of human smell. Our sense organs in the nose respond to smells based on the chemical structure of a molecule that comes up into our nose. We recognize it, and we know it smells like a flower or something pleasant or unpleasant. We recognize the smell of it. But the recognition of that molecule isn't simply the molecular structure. It's the quantum state configuration of the molecule. You can have exactly the same molecule, exactly the same structure of it. Nothing's changed about it. But the quantum state of it is different. And once you smell and once you don't. So that quantum mechanics does play a role in our sensory perception. And the nasal system is right next to the hippocampus. I think it probably is a very important role in our memory formation. And just on a kind of a superficial sense, quantum computers are being developed right now, information processing systems, and it's very possible that what we have in our heads here are actually very, very sophisticated quantum neural computers at work. So I think it's a very real possibility. But if you wanted to go even further, you could. I think it makes even sense. You could go further with memory storage, and you could get into string theory. String theory being in multi-dimensions, and then you could have multi-dimensional storage of memory taking place. I won't get into any details about it. It's a complex area, but fascinating. And so you end up with infinite amounts of storage, and even into multiple dimension states of memory possibly storage. Now, so these are just my speculations, my ideas. Other people speculate in a similar fashion. But I addressed this kind of issue in my own artwork. I took one of my other previous artworks, large-scale work on canvas, and I thought, well, if you're going to look at memory, well, what's one way to do it? You take a microscope and you look in the brain, like Carl did. He took a piece of brain and looked in it with a microscope and then drew it. Well, if I take my own artwork and look at it deeply with as a microscope. So I went into this piece, I looked at it deeply in a fine detail, and then enlarged it and ended up with this piece. This is a piece that's 4 meters across on canvas called Cubit. And now I'm searching for memory. Where is memory stored? And another one of the series is Pianissimo. I've used kind of musical titles for these particular pieces. And the effect, this is 4 meters wide, so what you're seeing here is just a tiny little postage stamp size of it. But the fuzziness here is very purposeful. If you come up closer to it and you see it's very fuzzy, it's not well defined, that's the quantum state. The quantum world it's very fuzzy, it's uncertain. The boundaries don't exist. It sort of overlaps. It's probabilistic. But on top of that, in this one, if you actually see the original, you see it possibly much better here. It's just tiny little reproduction of it. Is that you have these tiny little strings, little pieces of an entire thing is not only, but of string. I'm referring here to strings of string theory, and maybe this is where a lot of memory is stored and saved at the string level. To me, it's kind of fascinating. If I do the same process over again, I go in now into this piece, and I then go in further, and I blow it up, and I do some transformations that I did before, and that was something like this. And to me, this is very reminiscent of, if you make this a large-scale piece, of Monet's water lilies, Claude Monet's work, impressionist work. And this is just one of the water lilies at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. This one now is 7 meters across, very large piece, or more than that a little bit. And if you walk up close to and look at it, it's the same sort of similar effect to this thing. So to me, it's kind of interesting, the concept in my own art presentation, work that I did here, I sort of start in with a question. Let's look into memory. Let's look down deep. Let's go down into the quantum level. Let's go down into the string level. And then when you go down to those levels and then you go down further and further, boom, you're back up into the world where you started from, back out into the real world of water, of ponds and water lilies. Now, another issue that I've addressed in my artwork repeatedly is that memories are transformed in our neural networks. You know, for example, visual memories. We have a massive amount of visual memories in our heads and our minds, but we don't have filing cabinets of photographs, right? They're not there. There's not one. They're changed. They're transformed into neural networks. So in a lot of my artwork, I take photographs and then I change them, I transform them, and I use them in kind of in an analogous fashion to the way our brains transform things. For example, this is a photograph I took in Sagres, Portugal. Sagres is the most of the paths, and in the distance you see the Atlantic Ocean. It's on a cliff, on top of a cliff, overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. This is the most western tip of Europe, and this is where Christopher Columbus learned how to sail. And this is where he fantasized about going west to reach the New World. And so I used this, and I took this photograph, transformed it, put it under neural patterns, and come up with this large piece. And the title of this piece is called Dreams Exploration. And so there's, and you'll see different aspects of it in different parts of my artwork. So I transform the visual imagery, and I use it and combine it within our own neural networks in the same fashion as in a kind of similar fashion. Well, in a not similar, analogous fashion to how our minds work and our brains work. This particular piece was very popular, ended up on the front cover of the journal Neurology, which is the most widely read neurology journal in the world, published by the American Academy of Neurology. For 50 years, the journal only had either a green cover or had a listing of the articles on the front page. And on January 1st, 2013, they broke tradition and decided to put something interesting on it and asked me to contribute this piece. So they broke 50-year tradition with my artwork. And since then, it's appeared, they've had some kind of visual imagery on the front cover ever since. So it's sort of groundbreaking in some fashion. Now, another issue that I addressed is memories change over time. Human memory is very fragile. It's very malleable. And whenever we recall something from the past, we change it. It doesn't get stored back in the same fashion. It's changed by what's happening in our lives now. And that's just part of the way our memories work. They shift, they change. They are unreliable. Okay, they're not like a computer memory storage system. They're very malleable, and that's just the way it is. And sort of in an analogous fashion, if you go on my website, look at previous years of artwork, you'll see similar pieces keep showing up over the years, but they're changed, they're modified, and over time, it's done purposely. It's like I'm remembering, I'm doing this analogously. So my series of artwork, the series from one series to another, it's analogous to our brain, our mind, how things change over time. And for example, this is a picture in a church in Lithuania where my father and forefathers would go to Messiah Pilviškė during Mass. This picture was taken in 1988 or 89 when I was visiting there. And then I transformed it and used it in this particular image. And then in one series, and then a number of years later, it's different, it's changed. You can sort of see a little bit difference in the dimensions of it, the coloration of it's a little bit different. Here one has a word verbiage attached to it, the other one's changed, the words have gone, some of the associations have disappeared. But then if you look at the left lower hand corner of this piece, you'll see things that have been added in here. And these little drawing lines going up and down, those are my own electroencephalogram. Those are all my own brain waves. And if you see the coloration difference here, a lighter color near a darker color, this is where my own brain scan is. My brain scan is incorporated in it too, so that here things have changed. The images change over time and modifying, and I'm using my own brain, my own electrical brain, my own physical brain to produce these kind of things, so that my own art series is kind of produce analogy to how our own memories change. Now, looking at the societal cultural connection from the individual to society, I've addressed this in a number of my art series of artwork also. And one aspect of it is one piece that I did is it deals with a thing called mirror neurons. Now, to explain what a mirror neuron is, when the exact example where it was discovered is, let's say I'm reaching for an object with my right hand. I'm reaching out for it. There are neurons in my brain that fire that tell my arm to move and to do this movement. Okay, and those set of neurons work and they do that, and they produce this kind of movement. Now, amongst that network of neurons that produce this movement, there are neurons there that respond not only when I do this movement specifically, but they respond when they see somebody else do that same movement. In other words, you do this movement, I'm not moving, you do it, and these neurons respond. They recognize that one specific movement, okay? And so these neurons act like mirrors of what you do and what I do, they respond to it. Well, if you think about it a little bit, the mirror neurons may very well underline the entire system of how it is that we understand others, where empathy comes from, understanding of others comes from. And once you have understanding of others, then you have culture form, society form, on a broader scale. And on an individual scale, if you can't understand others and the system is broken, then maybe that's the cause for autism, because these individuals do have a problem interacting with other people. That's the primary deficit. So mirror neurons, and they do exist and they are real. And addressing this thing is myself working with my thought fragments again, installing these in a art gallery in downtown Chicago, putting them up. And as you see, this sort of looks like two neuronal structures sort of reflecting one another, sort of mirroring each other. So in this piece is called Mirror Neurons, and they're not identical, but similar enough. And the image was picked up by Oxford University Press. They asked me they purchased the rights to put it on the front cover of Michael Graziano's book, Consciousness and the Social Brain. Graziano is a professor of neurobiology at Princeton University. So it's kind of an honor to have my artwork grace the cover of this Oxford University Press publication. Now, societal interactions, a little bit more specifically, how we interact with each other, with the individual. I've addressed certain aspects of it in my own artwork. Now, I do have light columns, LED color changing light column. This is about 2 meters in size. It's about average human height. These columns have 3 layers of polycarbonate where there's images on them. The 3 layers correspond to unconscious, subconscious, and consciousness. And they have multiple layers of neurons, neural patterns, and other things incorporated in these pieces. And the colors change. This is the same piece actually, as the colors are changing. So give an idea of how the visual imagery changes sequentially over and over and over again, and constantly changing. And then this is just the image on this particular piece up here. This piece is dedicated to Samuel Beckett and his writing. And then this is the portrait of him from that particular piece as the colors are changing. And incorporated in here is a portion of the text from his play, Waiting for Godot. And here you can see the word Godot handwritten out from a segment of the play appear in here too, intermixed with the layers of content in this particular piece. Now, the most dramatic display of this took place at the University of Chicago's Rockefeller Memorial Chapel. Then these pieces, all the color are up and the colors are changing constantly. And it's a very dramatic effect. It was there for a few months on display. And here you have the pieces, and then as the colors change a little bit, the effect. And each one is independently color changing on its own. And in terms of the societal interactions, well, each piece is about human size and height. Okay, so it's like individuals. And like us as individuals, we radiate light. And that light can change. It can be bright, it can be dark, it can be very colored. Different moods come out of us. But we, so sort of analogous to us as persons, as our own moods change. But we also absorb the light from others. So there's absorption taking place from the other pieces. So there's that kind of visual, the kind of photon interaction taking place between these things. Now, in this particular set of distribution, I broke it up into three societal segments. Here you have three pieces. You can't see it in this photograph very well because you'd have to be there, and then it kind of the separation sort of stands out. The photograph kind of squishes everything together. But you have a group of three over here, a central group, highest up group here of three, and another side group of three that staggered at different heights. The central group here, at the center of it is the column dealing with Sigmund Freud, and here you have Beckett and you have Franz Kafka, writers and philosophers, and the father of psychoanalytical theory at the center of everything in terms of the mind and how the mind works. Here in this particular societal group setting. So you have a society of groups of three and sort of interacting more closely, separated from each other a little bit. And then you have this one piece which is far away. And this actually is much bigger in size, as you see, because it's much, much closer, separated, it's isolated, it's independent. And what this is my own dream. This is my own sort of self-portrait. And so the artist who's observing society, not participating in society, is off to the side and sort of observing what's taking place. So then that's sort of why this piece is sort of separate and held out at a distance. Again, analogous to societal interactions, analogous to an artistic, philosophical person's view on trying to understand society at large. Now, societal interactions, not everything is positive in society. Some things are terrible. You have atrocities. You have Hitler's extermination, gas chambers. You have Stalin's gulags of mass murder taking place. You have my own relatives in Lithuania, for my grandfathers, my relatives being killed and deported, outright killed and deported to Siberia, where so many people perished. And so my own artwork addresses these social things too, and the memory of it. And it was 10 years ago to commemorate the 70-year anniversary of the beginnings of mass deportations from Lithuania and Baltic republics. They organized the Open Spirit Project at the Balzakas Museum of Lithuanian Culture. This project took up 2 years of my life, and this entire program lasted for more than a year. It was a very elaborate program. This is the little thing that we had published before it started in June. And since then, and after that, it more than tripled in terms of the amount of activities that we did during that 1 year. And we got an awful lot of press attention, more press attention to this than ever in the history of this particular museum. Actually, more than any ethnic museum's history in Chicago, in terms of educating the general public about what happened in the past. And I look at this as part of my own artistic work. Then I took, as part of the project here, I was able to find several hundred letters and photographs that were sent from people in Siberia thanking their relatives for gifts because they only survived because of the packages that were sent out, the food and clothing packages to survive, and they were thankful for it. And I was able to find these photographs that had been lost to history, display them, image them, and so bring them back into history. So I took portions of these images and I converted them into my own artwork as part of the Siberia Souls things. And this is now one session. This is a wall hanging piece, which is about 2/3 of a meter in height, as the colors are changing. And this is children who were deported to Siberia, and you see in the images here, and with writing on it. These are letters that the children wrote in thanks to the relatives for the food and other supply items that they received. And this is now, so besides the color changing ones, I also had ones with just white LED light systems. And this set of Siberia Souls was displayed in a very large group exhibit in Grand Rapids, Michigan, part of Art Prize, the largest group art exhibit in the world. And during the 1 month exhibit, 17,000 people saw this display and had a chance to read my description about what happened to the people deported to Siberia. So that this is, you're getting the word out. It was very, very successful in that regard, informing the general public, reminding them of Stalin's atrocities. And then I took the color changing LED lights, photographed them, and then you see and then printed them on paper. So these are then prints made, and then again also with children's handwriting on it, a girl with her handwriting and thanks letters. And these prints were just recently displayed in Lithuania, City Marijampolė Cultural Center, and are currently on display right now, set of the Siberia Souls, and at the Vytautas Magnus University in Kaunas, Lithuania, in an exhibit that I opened there, and so that the word is still continuing to get. I'm getting the word out about people remembering what happened in Lithuania and in the entire Soviet world under Stalin. Now, other aspects of society, culture, going back in history. Okay. Our memories that we have, individual ones, come in part from what we learn, what we know. And so much of what we learn and what we know comes from the past. And some of it comes from ancient past. Our language that we use comes from ancient sources that have been modified over millennia, actually, that we use. So to go back, if one's going to look at the societal, cultural aspect of memory, you can go back fast and go back into archaeological things. And what I've done here, looking at origins of Indo-Europeans more broadly, not just Lithuanians, but where did Indo-Europeans come from? Immediately, this is a book that I came from back in 1961 is when it was published, Lithuanian Archaeology. And this is published in Soviet Lithuania. And I got it, and as I was a high school student and read a large portion of it, I was fascinated by origins of where Lithuanians came from as being dug up at that time. Little do I know that one of the people contributing to the drawings and to the material presented in there was Maria Gimbutas. And now this year is the 100-year anniversary of her birth. And so in Lithuania, there's a lot of activity taking place related to her and to her accomplishments. She had a theory about the origin of Indo-Europeans, and which she promulgated. And also the other aspect of the work that she did was ancient European culture and civilization, showing that it was matrifocal, not patrilineal, woman in orientation. And she came up with the term mother goddess, which is in common use. This is her term that she coined. And this is part of the drawing work that she did in her digs in 1938, 1939. This appears in that book from 1961, but it also appears in her PhD dissertation, which she obtained in 1946 in Germany, in post-war Germany. received her doctorate, and this is part of the work that she did. Now, in terms of, these are burial sites of old Lithuanian burials. A person will be buried and stones will be placed around the place where the bones are buried to mark as grave markers, basically. So what I did under this influence of this thing in 1981, when I was working at the Mayo Clinic, and I would then go frequent out for jogs and runs in Quarry Hill Park, or run up there. This area, what used to be a slate quarry. It had been recently a big rainstorm, the whole area was flooded. And I went out there and I picked up a lot of these stones and moved them around. And so that you'd have to mimic these ancient burial sites. And this is about 2 meters, same size, and the stones would have been sort of an imitation of ancient Lithuanian burial locations. I photographed it, and this has been used in multiple exhibits. And then in my more recent artwork, for example, I took this particular piece, art, transformed the photograph, and used it in the background in this 4-meter wide piece, which is now on permanent display in Lithuania by the Implicit here in Chicago at the version of it at the Beverly Art Center. Permanently displayed with a 4-meter work on canvas. And again, dealing with Lithuanian origins. And in the center of it, when you look at the very top, you see the sort of stylized letter M. And the intention of this was that Maria Gimbutas, to kind of include her in terms of having some contributed to at least basic inspiration of doing this particular artwork. Now, Maria, when she left post-war Lithuania and Germany, she escaped the Stalin purges by running, but my parents did, and escaping into Germany, ending up in North America. Her life was extremely difficult. She suffered tremendous. She continued her research, and if you wanted to know a little more details of it, there are some YouTube videos where I explain this during my introductions that were at the Oriental Institute talks. But tremendous discrimination in terms of being a woman, discrimination, being an immigrant, abuse of her, tremendous abuse. And to me, it was stunning that despite this incredible amount of abuse that she had to put up with, she persisted and continued with her professional career. She did not give in, and she fought. So to honor her, not just her own accomplishments, but as a human being, what she did, to honor her, I thought, well, she has to be honored in an appropriate location. And I organized the Maria Gimbutas Memorial Lecture Series, and I paid for it. And this took place at the Oriental Institute at the University of Chicago. And this is just a handful of top-level archaeology universities in the world, and this is one of the top-level ones. And so it's an appropriate place to honor a woman of accomplishment like her, which she had not been honored before. So I'm very proud to have organized this and having done that. The first, and this is just the inside of the museum of the Oriental Institute, showing you some of the remarkable things that are on display here. It really is a wonderful collection, worth coming to Chicago just to see what's in this one museum, much less everything else in Chicago. And this is at the first lecture I organized. It's Colin Renfrew, arguably the most famous living archaeologist in the world right now. He's at Cambridge University. He was a good friend of Maria Gimbutas, worked with her on collaborative projects when she was doing her digs. Then he became her arch enemy, criticized her massively for many decades. And then now at the memorial lecture, it was a historical event, absolutely, because he revealed the latest DNA evidence, and which proved that he was wrong and Maria was right. And the first time he presented this to the world was at the Oriental Institute. And that YouTube video does exist, and you can hear him talk and go into details about it. So it was an honor for me to have not only met him, but also to have arranged this historical talk. So he gave the first one. The second one was given 2 years ago by Petra Gutenberg. She's a Hittite linguist at the University of Chicago, and she looked at linguistic origins, and again, this gave very strong supportive evidence to the theory of that Maria Gimbutas had promulgated. And then coming up on December 1st of this year, Ruth Tingham is going to be giving a talk. She's from the University of California, Berkeley, and her talk is going to be not about Indo-European origins, but rather about the other aspect of Medigan, but this is a work about the ancient European culture and the mother goddess issue. So that I'm using my own art world here, as far as I'm concerned, as part of my artistic expressions, to delve back into ancient history and to recognize the people who have made major accomplishments. Now, in my own art, there's a big project that I've developed over this past year. I took further, besides doing that thing I did in 1981, photographing it, including it in large-scale paintings. I took that same drawing that I showed you before that Maria Gimlet has worked on and used in her PhD thesis, and took a portion of it. This is just the right side of it, the corner of it, at the same size exactly in terms of the size of it. I took a portion of it, and instead of using the smaller stones, I put in large stones, ones that will be at least a half a meter in height, in size, and to recreate the original thing. And then this site is being installed in Lithuania right now. And this is this summer, and they're putting boulders out. And this is Varnipai Sacred Mount, Piliakalnis. This is more than 3,000 years old. It's right, and it's a sacred area. It's protected archaeologically by the Department of Antiquities in Lithuania, protected it, and we did get permission to do this installation. And these are just fairly large stones, and then the people working to put these stones out here are sitting on them. The purpose, and I wanted these stones to be the size that you can actually sit on them so that you could use them. If you came out and you see the sacred mound out in back here, and to sit on it so that's usable. If you have people come out there, they want to, there's a little concert taking place there or presentation taking place there. People can sit down and rest. There's no stools, chairs, or anything out there, as you can see. And as if you wanted to come there, just sit down and just have lunch, or just so there's it's a usable type of a function of a thing. And this is Onutė Surdukienė. She's the one that lives in Marijampolė near this Piliakalnis. This has been absolutely key in getting this entire thing organized with me, and without her, this wouldn't have taken place at all. So I'm incredibly thankful to her. And then this is me just 2 months ago sitting on one of the stones. 1 month ago, sitting on the stones out there. And then on, this was September 22nd. The equinox, the fall equinox day, we sort of celebrated the kind of official opening of the stone installation. Had a number of bonfires set up here, and then the presentations and performances taking place with the local residents and attendants. And again, this is what that stone installation looks like. And right afterwards, we have student groups coming out there, children who are being taught about the history of Lithuania, the ancient Lithuanian history, and then what this is all about, and how this refers to our forefathers, our ancestors, and burial sites, and to recollect them. And as you see, this functional, you can sit and actually use these stones as such. Now, what's going to happen with them next summer, we're going to start painting them. Now, this is just a digital. This is Onutė sitting on the stones. And this is just a digital thing that I did to show the sort of patterns of what we're sort of planning. Each stone has its own family associated, individual family associated with it. And the neuronal patterns that you see are going to be, the majority of the stone will be unpainted, so that the painting will be just on certain aspects of it, is that it will include images and words and so from each family, so that they're the current families living in the vicinity will have their own stone, their own thing that they can refer to as part of their own legacy. And in the neuronal patterns will be say family names, other individuals, some drawings, some things that are important to the family itself, to identify it, and so that so we're referring to ancient Lithuanian sites, our ancestors, We're referring also now to current families living there. Okay. And since the paint will eventually fall off, this is outdoor. You have the sun, you have winter, you have rain, snow, ice will fall off every 4 or 5 years. It'll have to be renewed. And so that's the plan. So there was a program of renewal every 4 to 5 years for the future. So this is a sort of ongoing project that will be indefinitely going on in the future. So it's the past, the current, and the future, and our memories. Okay. That thing in the entire installation's title is Writings from the Past. I'm sorry. Memories written from in the past is the title of this entire installation. So now, in terms of my final latest series of art that I've done, is to take my own artwork and in terms of the societal end of it, make it more usable, make it something that one can do with, enjoy it more. You know, that pilaka and that sacred mound thing. It is in that category. People can go there, they can sit there, they can have lunch. So it's a usable, functional kind of a thing besides dealing with the history of it. But to do stuff that's more mobile, that can be moved around more, well, I took and put it on silk and made large-scale silk scarves. These scarves are about 1.4 meters square, and this is a model, professional model, showing, demonstrating them, what they look like. It's very nice photography, wonderful photography. Wasn't me. Vera Jakova in Chicago did the photography. He's a wonderful photographer. Came up with all of these things for me. And so that these scarves just last month had their premiere showing. Now, in terms of referring back to the past, my own past, this is the Ploplis surname as it first appeared in the world's history in the year 1561, exactly 460 years ago, in the inventory in the town of Verbalis in Lithuania. And these are examples: Rimkus Ploplis, Thomas Ploplis, Ienis Ploplis. Their names were handwritten from the original inventory, what it looked like. So to do the first presentation original, it makes sense to do it in Verbalis. Now, in Verbalis, this is the corner on the central square. This is where 450 years ago, Joseph Ploplis had his market, his area where he sold products on this spot on Market Square. This is where Matthew Ploplis lived in this location. And right across the street is where Martynas Mažvydas lived. He was a Lutheran priest, and he published the first Lithuanian book. He's an absolutely important person in the history of Lithuania and history of Lithuanian literature. The first Lithuanian book was a catechism, but it was in Lithuanian. And he wrote it and published it, and he lived, this is where his house and the location of it was. So referring back to the origins of Ploplis, or referring back to the origins of that this was a Lutheran city at the time, by one of the most important Lutheran ministers in Lithuanian history, to have the premier presentation of my new series of artwork in the Lutheran Church was wonderful. Now it is really sort of, this was built in the late 1800s, I think, and it does need some upkeep, but the roof doesn't leak, and it is used as a church. And the second floor was cleaned out, and these are the scarves that were on display. And these are just some images of them. Again, these are 1.4 meters squared, and there's 14 of them. And the display of it was an absolutely magnificent area to show such a medieval sense about it. And we had a harp and a flute at the opening, and models demonstrated the pieces. I explained it. It was a wonderful, wonderful event that took place. And then after that, the show moved to the capital, Vilnius, and here we had a professional guitarist playing music, and a choreographer developed her own dance routine and styles to demonstrate the scarf besides the exhibit that took place. And a very, very beautiful presentation. The Verbalis show, there's some very beautiful YouTube videos that you can see on my YouTube channel. This one, the video is being produced right now. Within a week, I hope to have it up on my YouTube channel so you can see the actual silk scarves in motion. Now, you may have noticed that in a lot of my work, I'm using my own previous artwork, my own memories, and I build upon it. I take a piece that was in 1981 that I did. I then incorporate it into large-scale painting. I use it, build on it. And then I take that same concept and ideas, I'm doing it right now in a totally different form. This is the way our memories and our minds work, our own experience. We come up with future projects based on our own past memories. They can be dramatically different, but still based on it. So my series of artwork, going from one to the next, are analogous to the way our minds work. And you repeat it over and over and over again. And that's what I do in my art series is. This purposeful. In my art, I'm trying to do what our minds do naturally over time. And I'm doing the same kind of analogous system. Now, thank you for your attention. There's a lot of information about my art that you can find on my primary website, drplease.com. The entire Stalin experience is summarized at the hopeandspirit.net website. I invite you to take a look at my YouTube channel. Just put my name in there, you'll find it, the large number. The Silk Scarves exhibit is really stunningly beautiful. And on Instagram, which I try to keep up on this sort of with everything happening this morning, I'm a little behind on updating my Instagram posting, but at Preply's Art. So thank you very, very much for your attention. That's the end of my presentation. And if there's any questions, I'd be glad to answer it.